Today we're going to take off the front wheel and reinstall it. Let's get started. Because we're going to have both wheels off at the same time, I've just put a jack under the power lever on the rear so that it won't tip backwards when the front wheel's coming off. I've also got a jack underneath the engine, on the engine mount, just a bottle jack very gently to make sure the front wheel stays up while we're taking it off. Because there's only a small beak on the 1150 rather than the 1100, which has got a much bigger one, the bolts that hold these beaks are two at the top, two on the side, one on each side. Because there's enough flexibility, we just have to take the sides ones off, both sides, and that'll lift the beak up sufficiently to be able to take the wheel out when we take it off. So what we need to do today is bolts out both sides here, the caliper bolts out, these two bolts here, then we'll loosen the axle, and then the 6mm hexes we have here, we undo those, and that'll allow us to take the axle out. That'll be Harry, our neighbour. He always makes sure that the garage is all safe and no one comes in. On the other side of the axle is just a bar, or holes, which we can put the bar through to help pull it off afterwards. So we just need a screwdriver, quite thin, or anything like that. We just take the bolts for the beak off. This is a 5mm hex. They're not very tight at all. Next, take the brake calipers off. That's a T45 Torx. As we take these off, we'll squeeze them side to side just to get the brake pads away from the wheel. So just twist them side to side a bit until they're a bit looser, and then just slip them straight off. It will increase your brake fluid levels up on the bar, so just make sure there's sufficient space to do that. Just be careful of the ABS sensor here, and also be aware of the speedometer, which sits in here. The speedometer's got to be in a certain way. I'll put a photo up for that. And they just slip off like that. Onto the other side, both brake calipers are now off. Now we undo this nut here. It's a 17mm socket. And we'll see there's a bit of rust on the ends of these, so we'll put some copper anti-seize on those before we put all these nuts back in. Okay, now that we've got the wheel nut off, we'll take these pincers, these are a 6mm hex, and we'll loosen those. If they don't come off, don't get too concerned, we'll just need them loose. If they can come out without seizing, we'll take them all the way out and put some anti-seize on them. Last thing you want to do is break these bolts, because these are steel bolts into an aluminium. Okay, as we take this axle out, the speedometer hub needs to come out. Just have to keep it in a certain way. There's ridges on the back of this axle here and lugs on the speedometer hub. Those lugs hold this cable in that position. That's the position we need to hold it when we put it back together again. So we get our screwdriver, and our holes on the axle on this side, and we just slowly extract it. There's a spacer on the right hand side of the bike. I'll show you when I've got it out. We need to make sure that spacer goes back in the right direction. The little tongue goes towards the outside. Okay, now we just gently take the wheel out. This beak will come up a little bit. So we can roll the wheel out. I will put a jack under here as well. across the bars here of the axle. I don't want that front dropping down, so it makes it hard putting the wheels back in afterwards. Okay, we'll just make sure the bike's sufficiently supported with both the wheels off. Just make sure when you're putting it on that the tyre rotation is correct, going forwards. And also make sure that you align the speedometer when it goes in. That part of the speedo goes into a lug on the inside. I'll show you a picture of it. And that needs to be aligned, and as does the inside, before you put the speedo back on. So we'll just put the wheel back in. I've also put a copper anti-seize on all the bolts. I've also just put a very light layer of wheel bearing grease on the axle. Just clean it all up. That's got to go back in. The spacer's got to go back in again. The axle goes through the fork, then the spacer like that, then through the wheel, and then on this side the speedometer cable, and then into this. That's there. Just might need a bit of a tap to get it all through. Okay, and the axle's back in. So just check to make the speedo cable is lugged in the right place, which it is. And we want to make sure this is straight as it was before. So just put the axle bolt in, just hand tight at this stage. The pinch bolt's got anti-seize on them. So pinch bolts on both sides. Just put those in loosely as well, and we'll put the brakes back on. Just with the brakes, make sure the pads are still separated nicely. They should just go straight over the disc. If they don't, the pad might be slightly out of alignment, but it should be all good. And just line the brakes up. Wiggle them around a bit until you can feel the nuts grabbing. Don't forget, these nuts don't have any washers in them. Other side. And our main bolt here, which is a 17mm socket, we torque up to 30 Newton meters. We just take our screwdriver on the other side and make sure the hole there is horizontal. £30 Newton meters. Now these pinch bolts that go in here are 20 Newton meters. 20 Newton meters. And to the other side. And onto the brake calipers. E45 torques and are set for 25 Newton meters. That's the front wheel back on. Okay, the last step of the front assembly is to put the beak back together. So again, we've got copper anti-seize on the bolts, 5mm hex. You might have to wiggle around a bit just to align them. Once one is aligned, the other will align much more easily. Onto the other side. Just nip those up, they don't need very much at all. Front's done now, other than just re-engaging the brakes. Is to make sure the brake pads are bedded back in, because we've had them apart, you'll have no braking for the first couple of squeezes. Okay, we'll just kick the servo into action and bed the brakes so that we have brakes when we take it off the hoist. So you'll be able to hear the servo go in. Okay, we've got brakes again.
Why does it make that
And
noise?
we're done.